Thinking of exiting your business or taking on a private equity partner to help you grow faster? BizNexus has you covered. Tap into our network of thousands of best-fit investors, acquirers, and proven M&A advisors, and we'll help you begin the relationship confidentially on your terms, your timeline. Learn more at biznexus.com.
Disclaimer from the always present legal team. Podcast conversations don't necessarily reflect the views of BizNexus Incorporated. Everything you hear is informational news and updates from around the industry. We're not recommending any investments. We're not offering any investment advice. Be sure to do your own homework.
Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at mergers and acquisitions, but specifically we're going to be focusing on what supervisory boards need to know. Now, full disclosure, when I first saw M&A Guide, I have to admit, I thought, all right, how dry can this get? But let me tell you, this KWC document, spearheaded by Peter Slagers, it's anything but.
It really is. What I found really interesting was how they addressed the elephant in the room right away. I mean, M&A failure rates, they can be pretty scary, but the document doesn't shy away from that at all. Instead, it's like they're handing us a toolkit, to navigate this whole complex world of M&A and actually come out on top.
Right. They're talking about failure rates somewhere between 50% and 80%.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big red flag.
Yeah.
Clearly, we need all the help we can get. And this document really is like having a seasoned M&A advisor right there with you.
Absolutely. And they start by kind of setting the scene, right? They point out that M&A activity is actually booming right now. It's even surpassed the dot-com era. Companies are really hungry for growth, especially in today's economic climate. But all this activity, it creates this intense pressure to compete.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's jumping on the M&A bandwagon these days. So what is it that separates the winners, the ones who actually succeed, from those who, become part of that 80% that doesn't quite make it?
Well, that's where strategy comes in. The document emphasizes that M&A can't be just about getting bigger for the sake of it. It has to be a deliberate move, something that truly aligns with the overall strategy of your company.
And they even go as far as suggesting that companies should regularly review their portfolios and identify potential divestitures, right? It's interesting because usually we think of growth not necessarily shrinking.
I know, right? It sounds counterintuitive, but think about it. Sometimes letting go of a business unit, especially if it's not really core to your strategy, can actually free up resources. It allows you to really focus on what's truly driving value.
It's like decluttering your business, making room for what really matters. Now, this document doesn't shy away from the risks involved either. They talk about things like deal fever and tunnel vision, and those sound like pretty serious hazards to me.
Oh, they are. It's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of a potential deal, especially when everyone's talking about those amazing synergies and all the growth that could come from it. But that's where having a really robust due diligence process becomes absolutely critical.
So due diligence is more than just checking the financials, right? It's about taking a step back, looking at everything objectively. It's about identifying the risks, but also seeing the opportunities.
Exactly. And this is where the supervisory board plays a really critical role. You need to make sure that due diligence is done thoroughly. It has to be objective, and it has to look at all angles.
So from your experience, what are some of the red flags that supervisory boards should be on the lookout for during due diligence? Like, what are some things that might signal trouble down the road?
Well, I'd say one of the most common pitfalls is overly optimistic financial projections, especially when it comes to those synergies we were talking about. Another one is not fully understanding the target company's culture. And you know how important culture is? How it might clash with your own company culture.
So culture clash is a big deal. Yeah, I could see how trying to merge two companies with vastly different cultures could quickly turn into chaos.
Oh, absolutely. Integration is really where the rubber meets the road, and it's often where deals fall apart. The document really emphasizes that you need a very detailed plan for integration. You need dedicated resources, clear milestones.
And they talk about managing cultural differences, right? It's not just about merging systems, it's about people, too.
Yes. Merging people is key. It's not just about bringing systems and processes together. It's about bringing people together. And that requires sensitivity. You need open communication, and you need a plan to address those cultural differences because there will be bumps along the way. It's inevitable.
It all sounds like a massive undertaking, to be honest. It's clear that M&A is not something you should jump into lightly.
Definitely not. And that's why the document really hammers home the importance of developing what they call M&A capabilities. It's not enough to just do a deal here and there. You need to get good at the whole process. You need to build that muscle, if you will.
It's like working out, right? The more you do it, the stronger you get.
Exactly. And that's where being a frequent acquirer can actually give you an advantage. Every deal you do, you learn something new. You refine your approach. You develop a playbook that really works for your company.
Okay, we've talked about the big picture, but what about the specifics? What are some of the things that really make a difference between a successful acquisition and one that, well, flocks? The document highlights a few key factors, like strategic fit, right?
Oh, absolutely. Acquiring a business that really aligns with your core competencies, your market strategy, that tends to be much more successful than going off into uncharted territory.
Makes sense. If you're stepping into a completely new industry, naturally the risks are going to be higher. But what about choosing between acquiring a private company versus a public company? Does the document talk about that at all?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Acquiring a listed company usually involves paying what they call a premium. It could be 30% or even 40% above the actual share price. That premium can make it a lot harder to actually achieve financial success compared to acquiring a private company where you don't have that added pressure.
That's a big difference. It seems like going public comes with a higher price tag in the M&A world.
It does. And speaking of pricing, the document also talks about how timing is everything. If you're buying during a hot M&A market, when competition is fierce and valuations are inflated, that can be riskier than buying during a cooler market.
So it's not just about finding the right target, it's about finding it at the right time. Kind of like surfing, waiting for that perfect wave to ride. And then, of course, we have the whole concept of synergies, which can be a bit elusive. What does the document say about those?
Right. Well, they talk about two types: cost synergies and revenue synergies. Cost synergies, they say, are usually more predictable, easier to control.
Because you're essentially streamlining operations, finding ways to do things more efficiently, right?
Exactly. But revenue synergies, those are trickier. They rely on boosting sales, which can be really hard to predict and even harder to actually achieve.
It's like hoping that 1 + 1 will magically equal 3. And that's not always the case.
Right. Sometimes those revenue synergies, they just don't materialize like you hoped they would. So focusing on those cost efficiencies, the operational improvements, that might actually be a safer bet if you're looking to create value.
Okay, so we've covered strategy, due diligence, even touched on those tricky synergies.
Yeah.
But what about the actual acquisition process itself? What are the steps companies can take to minimize the risks, increase their chances of success? I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Oh, we definitely have. And that's where the document really shines. It gives us a roadmap for navigating each step of the acquisition process, from the very beginning, like identifying a target, all the way to that final integration. I think that's where we should pick up next time on the deep dive.
Yeah, we've only just started to peel back the layers of this whole M&A thing. The acquisition process itself, well, it's full of potential problems, and this is where that deal fever we were talking about, it can really lead to some bad decisions. So how can companies, especially supervisory boards, how can they stay grounded, stay objective when the pressure's on and everyone's getting excited about a potential deal?
Well, the document really emphasizes the importance of sticking to your guns. Sticking to your M&A strategy, the acquisition criteria you set beforehand. It's so easy to get distracted by a shiny new opportunity, but if it doesn't fit with your long-term goals, it's probably not worth the risk.
It's like having a shopping list and then going to the store and getting totally sidetracked by all the flashy displays and impulse buys. You end up with a bunch of stuff you don't even need, and you've blown your budget.
Exactly. And that's where having those checks and balances throughout the process, it's super important. PwC recommends setting up what they call a transaction committee. It would have members from both the management board and the supervisory board. Think of it as a safeguard. This committee makes sure that every decision is aligned with the overall strategy and that no one is getting, too carried away with the thrill of the deal.
So it's like having a group of experienced shoppers with you. And they can say, hey, hold on a second. Let's just double check that this is something we actually need and that it fits our budget before we, throw it in the cart.
Exactly. And it's not just about oversight. It's about having different perspectives, different types of expertise at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing they stress is not relying too much on those external advisors, especially when it comes to things like valuation.
So don't just blindly trust the numbers coming from those investment bankers.
Right. I mean, advisors have their role, but ultimately it's the company itself that knows its business best. Supervisory boards, they need to be actively involved in that valuation process. They have to make sure it's based on real data, realistic assumptions, not just wishful thinking.
Yeah, those rosy projections can be really tempting, especially when you're in the middle of that deal fever.
Oh, absolutely. The document even warns about something called anchoring bias, where people get fixated on the first piece of information they hear, even if it's not accurate.
So if the investment banker throws out a big valuation number early on, everyone starts thinking in terms of that number, even if it's way too high.
Exactly. So you got to challenge those assumptions, ask the hard questions, make sure that valuation is grounded in reality.
Okay, so we've got our checks and balances, we're scrutinizing the valuation, but what about due diligence? We talked about it before, but how can we ensure that it's really effective, that it's doing its job?
Well, they stress that due diligence shouldn't just focus on the risks. It should also explore the opportunities that the target company brings to the table. You need a diverse team for this. Internal functions, business units, and yeah, maybe even some external advisors too.
So it's about more than just uncovering potential problems. It's also about finding those hidden gems, those things that could actually create even more value down the line.
Exactly. And this is where really understanding the target company is key. Their industry, their market position, their competitors. Supervisory boards can bring their own experience to the table, challenge the due diligence team, and make sure everything is covered.
And all of that information from due diligence feeds into the integration plan, right?
Right.
And as we discussed earlier, that's often where deals can really go south.
Absolutely. They make it clear that a detailed integration plan is crucial if you want to actually realize the value of a deal. It should outline how you're going to manage the target company, how you're going to capture that value, and how you're going to handle those cultural differences we talked about.
It's like having a roadmap, not just for merging the finances, but for merging the people, the processes, the cultures of these two companies.
Right. They even recommend setting up a dedicated team for integration with people from both the acquiring company and the target company. This team, they need the power to make decisions, solve problems quickly.
So it's like a special task force with a clear mission to make this integration as smooth as possible.
Exactly. And communication, it's key throughout this whole process. This team needs to keep everyone in the loop, address any concerns, and really foster a sense of shared purpose. You're bringing together two groups of people who might have very different ways of doing things.
Yeah, it's like building a bridge between two islands. And communication, that's the foundation of that bridge. Now, we've talked about the people side of integration, but what about the financial side? Acquisitions, they often require a lot of capital, and that can put a strain on a company's resources, right?
Absolutely. PwC really stresses the importance of having a solid financing plan in place. It should outline where the funding is coming from, what impact it will have on the company's finances, its credit rating. They even suggest doing some what-if scenarios, to see how the deal would hold up if things took a turn for the worse.
So it's not just about having enough money to buy the company. It's about understanding what it means for your finances in the long run and having a backup plan if things don't go exactly as planned.
Exactly. And remember, they emphasize that management needs to stay in control of the deal throughout the whole process. This can be especially challenging for companies that don't do M&A very often. They might be relying a lot on those external advisors.
Right, so don't let the advisors take over. Stay in the driver's seat, make sure the decisions are aligned with your company's goals. It's your deal, after all. Now, we've focused a lot on acquisitions, but the document also has some valuable insights for supervisory boards when it comes to divestitures.
Oh, that's right. Sometimes letting go can be just as important as acquiring, especially if you want to streamline your business, focus on your core strengths. And divestitures, they require careful planning, just like acquisitions.
So what are some of the key things that PwC highlights when it comes to divestitures? What should supervisory boards be thinking about?
Well, they emphasize the need for a really structured review of your business portfolio. You need to identify those potential divestiture candidates, figure out which parts of the business aren't really core to your operations, and you have to ask yourself, could someone else do a better job with this?
It's about recognizing that sometimes a business unit might actually do better under different ownership, where it can get more attention and resources. But this isn't a decision to be made lightly, right? Divestitures, they can be just as complicated as acquisitions.
Oh, absolutely. And there are some pitfalls to watch out for. PwC recommends doing something called vendor due diligence before you even start trying to sell the business unit. This helps the company understand the unit's strengths and weaknesses so you're not caught off guard later on.
So it's like doing your homework before you put your house up for sale, right? You want to know exactly what you're selling, what potential buyers might find attractive, or maybe even concerning. And this due diligence, it should go beyond just the financials, right? It should also cover things like operations, customer relationships, even employee contracts.
Exactly. And then there's the whole process of actually separating the business unit from the parent company, which can be pretty tricky, especially if you have a lot of shared functions or IT systems. PwC says it's important to start this separation process early, even before you start looking for buyers, to avoid disruptions and delays.
I like planning a move. You don't want to wait until the last minute to pack your boxes and figure out how to get everything from point A to point B. It's a lot smoother if you start early and do things in an organized way.
Precisely. And just like with acquisitions, communication is crucial. Employees, customers, suppliers, they all need to be kept informed about what's happening.
Yeah, change can be unsettling, and when people are unsure about what's going on, that's when the rumors and anxieties start to spread. So it's really important to be open and address people's concerns directly.
Absolutely. PwC also points out something really interesting about divestitures, something supervisory boards should be aware of. The management team of the division you're selling, their loyalties might shift.
That's a good point. I can see how that could happen. They might not be sure where they stand, Will they stay with the parent company? Will they go with the new owner? Will their jobs change? Will they even have jobs?
Exactly. And this is especially true if you're selling to a private equity firm. The management team might get offered incentives to support the deal, which could put their own interests ahead of the parent company's. PwC advises management to be proactive about managing this potential conflict of interest.
So it's about setting clear guidelines, having open communication, maybe even putting some contractual safeguards in place to make sure that everyone is acting in the best interests of the company throughout the entire divestiture process. It sounds like there's a lot to think about, both from a strategic and a human perspective. Now, we've talked about acquisitions and divestitures, but there's one more crucial aspect of M&A that PwC highlights: developing M&A capabilities.
Right. It's not enough to just do a deal every now and then. You need to become really good at the whole M&A process, make it a strength of your organization. The document emphasizes that companies that do M&A frequently tend to do better than those that only do it occasionally because they learn from each deal and get better at it over time.
So it's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And like any skill, M&A expertise takes practice, dedication, and willingness to learn from your mistakes.
Exactly. And PwC outlines a few key things that companies can do to develop those M&A muscles. It starts with having the right organizational structure. You need a dedicated M&A team that can work effectively with other departments.
So it's about creating a whole M&A ecosystem within the company where everyone understands their role and how it all fits together. And this team needs to have people with experience, people who really know the ins and outs of M&A.
Absolutely. And beyond just the structure, the document also talks about building strong relationships with potential acquisition targets.
So it's not just about waiting for deals to come to you. It's about being proactive, going out there and making connections that could lead to future acquisitions.
Exactly. That can give you a real advantage, especially when the M&A market is hot and everyone's chasing after the same targets. The guide also highlights the importance of having clear procedures and templates for different stages of the M&A process, from due diligence to integration.
So it's like having a playbook, a set of best practices that you can use and refine over time. This helps to ensure consistency, reduce errors, and make the whole process more efficient. It's like having a recipe for M&A success.
Precisely. And finally, the document emphasizes the importance of learning from past experiences. PwC recommends doing what they call a post-mortem assessment after each deal, figuring out what went well, what could have been done better, and then using those lessons in future transactions.
So it's a continuous improvement process, always trying to get better at M&A and turning it into a strategic advantage, not just a risky gamble. And everyone should be involved in this learning process, from the deal team to the supervisory board. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the strategic aspects of M&A to the nuts and bolts of doing a deal and integrating companies. But there's one more thing I want to touch on before we wrap up.
What's that?
Well, we've talked a lot about the strategic and financial side of things, but what about the human side? Merging two companies or even divesting a business unit, it can be a really emotional process for the people involved.
You're absolutely right. M&A is often seen as just a financial transaction, but we can't forget that there are real people whose lives are affected by these decisions. Employees, customers, suppliers, they all have a stake in the outcome.
So how can supervisory boards make sure that the human side of M&A is given the attention it deserves?
Well, communication is key. People need to be kept in the loop throughout the process. They need to feel like their voices are being heard.
It's about being open, being honest, explaining why decisions are being made, and addressing any concerns that come up.
Exactly. And it's also about being sensitive to how people are feeling. Mergers and acquisitions, they can be really disruptive. They can create uncertainty, anxiety, even fear among employees.
So it's important to acknowledge those emotions, provide support, and create a sense of stability, of security.
Absolutely. Supervisory boards can play a big role in this by making sure that management has a plan to address the human side of M&A. This might include things like providing clear and timely communication to employees about what's happening and how it will affect them, offering support and resources to help employees through the transition, like counseling, outplacement services, or training programs, involving employees in the integration process, giving them a voice and a sense of ownership, recognizing and rewarding employees who are going above and beyond during the transition, and celebrating successes along the way to boost morale and build momentum.
Okay, those are some practical steps companies can take to address the human side of things. But what about the supervisory board itself? What can they do to make sure they're approaching these decisions with empathy, with sensitivity?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that M&A is not just about numbers. It's about people, and it's about the impact these decisions have on people's lives.
So bringing a human-centered perspective to the boardroom.
Exactly. And it's about asking the tough questions. How will this deal affect our employees? What will it mean for our customers and suppliers? Are we doing everything we can to minimize the disruption and support those who are affected?
It's about holding management accountable, not just for the financial results, but for the human impact of their decisions as well.
Precisely. And I think it's also important for supervisory boards to be aware of their own biases.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we all have biases, right?
Okay.
And they can affect how we make decisions even when we don't realize it. For example, we might be more likely to support a deal if it benefits people we know, even if it's not the best thing for the company as a whole.
So it's about being aware of those biases and actively trying to counter them.
Exactly. That might mean getting different perspectives, challenging assumptions, and being willing to change our minds when we see new information.
It's about being open-minded, being objective, and putting the company and its stakeholders first, even before our own personal biases. I think that's a great place to wrap things up for today. We've covered so much ground, from the strategic thinking behind M&A to the importance of considering the human side of these deals.
But we haven't even gotten into the complexities of cross-border M&A, joint ventures, or SPACs.
Oh my, there's always more to learn about M&A. But for now, I think we've given our listeners a good foundation to build on.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway from this deep dive is that successful M&A isn't just about crunching numbers and signing papers. It's about people, it's about strategy, and it's about creating value for everyone involved.
Excellent advice. And a big thank you to PwC and Peter Slagers for putting together such a comprehensive and insightful guide for supervisory boards. It's a valuable resource for anyone involved in M&A, and it's given us a lot to think about today.
Indeed. It's been a pleasure diving deep into this with you.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and informative. Be sure to come back for more deep dives into the fascinating world of business and finance.
Until next time.
We've really been digging into this M&A guide from PwC, and Peter Slagers, he really led the charge on this. And it's clear that these public offers, they're a whole different animal. It's like the company's suddenly thrown into this spotlight and everyone's watching their every move.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That kind of scrutiny can be really intense, especially for the management team. They might be dealing with their first public offer, and the pressure to get it right with everyone from shareholders to the media chiming in, well, it can be overwhelming.
And the document actually points out that all that pressure can lead to mistakes. Right? They even talk about how management can kind of lose control of the situation, especially when you have multiple bidders or if things get, well, a little hostile.
Exactly. And that's why they emphasize the importance of the supervisory board in these situations. They're the steady hand, the voice of reason, making sure that the company doesn't lose sight of the big picture.
It's like, the captain of a ship in a storm. You got to stay calm, assess the situation, and make the tough calls to keep the ship on course.
Perfect analogy. And PwC actually is out a pretty practical framework for how to navigate those choppy waters. They talk about having a clear process for information and decision making.
So it's about creating an environment where the board has access to the information they need, they can talk things through, and they can make decisions without worrying about leaks or insider trading and all that.
Right. A secure and transparent process is key. And it's not just about having a process, it's about making sure that everyone involved understands it and follows it. Another point they raise is the need to really look at the independence of the management board and any non-executive directors involved.
Because conflicts of interest, they can always pop up, right? Especially if private equity is involved. Management might get some pretty sweet incentives to push the deal through, even if it's not the best thing for the company in the long run.
Exactly. The supervisory board has to be on their toes, looking closely at those incentives and making sure they align with the company's best interests. They also need to make sure that management is exploring all the options, not just grabbing the first offer that comes their way.
So it's about being proactive, not reactive, right? Doing your due diligence and looking at all the possibilities. Maybe there are other buyers out there. Maybe staying independent is the best option. Maybe selling off some assets would make the company more attractive.
Yeah, exactly. Weigh the pros and cons, think strategically, and make the call that's right for the company, not just for the management team.
And all along the way, you got to keep those lines of communication open, right? The board needs to keep everyone informed, explain their reasoning, address any concerns that come up. Transparency is key to building trust.
Couldn't agree more. And PwC also recommends bringing in independent financial advisors to give an unbiased opinion on the offer. This might include valuing the company, giving a fairness opinion, and analyzing the potential risks and benefits of the deal.
So it's like having an expert in your corner to help you understand the offer and make sure you're getting a fair shake. And that's something supervisory boards should be doing in any M&A situation, not just public offers.
You got it. Independent advice, that expert perspective, it's essential, especially when the stakes are this high.
Public offers, they really are like walking a tightrope. You need balance, focus, and a steady hand.
No doubt about it. But with careful planning, a strong supervisory board, and the right advice, companies can come out on top.
I think this has been a really eye-opening deep dive, wouldn't you say? We've covered a lot of ground, from picking the right target to the ins and outs of due diligence, integration, divestitures, and even those high-pressure public offers.
I agree. And I think what's impressive about this PwC document and Peter Sliger's work on it is how honest it is. It doesn't sugarcoat the challenges. It acknowledges those high failure rates, the potential pitfalls, even the emotional toll it can take on people.
But it also shows the incredible opportunities that M&A can create. When you do it right, with a clear strategy, discipline, and a commitment to doing things well, M&A can be a powerful engine for growth and value.
Absolutely. It's all about understanding the nuances, knowing what to watch out for, and seizing the opportunities as they come.
We really hope that this deep dive has given you the tools and knowledge you need to make smart decisions and navigate the world of M&A.
Until next time, happy deal making, everyone.
Acquiring a business? BizNexus simplifies it. Access thousands of updated opportunities in our DIY marketplace or supercharge team sourcing with OmniSource, your all-in-one platform for on-market, off-market, and coming-soon deals. Scale smarter today. Learn more or book a demo at www.biznexus.com.